In this lesson, we're going to talk about redundant site considerations. Now, a redundant site is a backup location or facility that can take over essential functions and operations in the case that your primary site experiences a failure or disruption. When you're creating your business continuity plan or your disaster recovery plan, you need to consider what type of continuity you need to create using these different plans. From a technical perspective, we're going to break this down into 4 types of categories based on your continuity locations. These are hot sites, warm sites, cold sites, and mobile sites. Now, first up, we have a hot site. A hot site is defined as a site that is up and running continuously, and essentially, at a moment's notice, it's ready so we can switch our operations from our main site to a backup site with almost no downtime and no issues. Now, personally, this is one of my favorite types of setups because it means you always are up and ready to go, and you can keep your business moving forward even if a disaster strikes. But our drawback here is that using a hot site can be very expensive because this type of redundant site requires one of everything being added to your cost. For example, to truly have an on-demand and ready-to-go hot site, you're going to need to have 2 of everything. If I have a file server in my main office, I need to have another file server at the hot site. You're going to need to constantly update the communication and mirror the data between these 2 sites as well, so you have an updated copy at all times. Now, back in the old days, this was actually really difficult and expensive to do. But the good news is, with cloud computing, this has become much, much easier because now you can have your servers hosted online at multiple locations simultaneously using Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, or the Google Cloud Platform. Now, while this type of hot site for your servers is great, it doesn't fully consider everything you need in terms of a hot site. Again, what about your office building where your employees are going to be and doing their work? How are you going to have redundancy for that? Well, let's say, for example, there's a fire and your entire headquarters got affected. You have smoke damage and water damage, all because of that fire. And now it's going to take you 6 months to rebuild your headquarters. Well, if you have a fully redundant cloud-based model for your hot site, this means all your data is up and running instantly and ready to go. But if you had 500 people working in that office building, you now need to find a place to put 500 desks, 500 chairs, 500 phones, 500 computers, and all the stuff that people need to be able to do their job at work because everything else was destroyed in that fire at our main headquarters. This is why a hot site is usually not used by most companies for their entire business, but instead, they'll use it just for mission-critical things that have to be up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, continuously. And so you may have 500 people working in your main office building, but maybe only 50 of them are considered essential and crucial to your business operations, and so you only have a hot site capability for those 50 people, and we'll figure out the other 450 people later. Now, the second type of site we have is what's known as a warm site. Now, a warm site is not fully equipped like a hot site is, and so remember, with a hot site, we have our desks, we have our chairs, we have our network connectivity, we have our computers and our phones and our software and everything we need to be able to walk right in, log in, and start doing our job. Now, with a warm site, we're not quite that far down the road. Instead, we're not ready for an immediate switchover, but we can get things up and running in just a few days as opposed to a few hours. Now, a warm site will have all the fundamentals in place. For example, the building already has power, it has phone lines, it has network connectivity. We may even have some desks there, but we may not have phones and computers already installed. Now, when a disaster happens, we can then start installing the technology and getting people up and running within just a few days. But we're going to have to go out and buy some laptops, some monitors, and some phones and things like that to be able to do it. Now, when we talked about a hot site, we talked about the fact that it was instantly available, but that also comes with a very high price tag. Now, with a warm site, we're actually going to be able to save a lot of money here, and it's going to be a lot cheaper, but we're also giving up some of that response time because now we have to wait a few days to be able to get everything up and running. And so again, this is one of those things that we sometimes do as a hybrid model, where a portion of the organization will get a hot site, such as those 50 people out of the 500 that were super critically important to run the business, and then the other 450 people would be able to go into a warm site later on, or into our last one we're going to talk about, which is a cold site. Now, this again brings us to our third option, which is a cold site. Now, this is going to add some more time to our recovery, but it is also cheaper than using either a hot site or a warm site. Now, a cold site is going to contain even fewer facilities than a warm site does. For example, one organization I worked with in the past had a cold site that essentially was just an empty building they had a lease on. They paid a monthly rent for this building and nobody worked there. The cold site had a few basic facilities like bathrooms and tables and chairs, but there was no network or connectivity at that place. There were no phone lines and there was no computers. Essentially, it was an empty shell. And in the event of a serious disaster at their headquarters, they could turn this cold site into a new headquarters in about 1 to 2 months. Now, fourth, we have a mobile site. Now, a mobile site can be a hot site, a warm site, or a cold site. It just depends on how you want to configure it. Now, basically up to this point, I was discussing how you can get from one building to another by using a hot site, a warm site, or a cold site. But with a mobile site, we don't even need buildings anymore. Instead, we're using independent, portable units to provide our recovery. Most often, this will take the form of trailers or tents that are going to be delivered to your location and connected to your power and internet, and that way you can get up and running pretty quickly. For example, I used to work with the US military, and they have something known as the DJC-2. Now, the DJC-2 is the Deployable Joint Command and Control System. This thing is actually an integrated command and control headquarters that can be delivered anywhere in the world within about 72 hours. Now, once it gets on the ground, it takes them another 24 hours to start providing some functionality and services, and then takes up to 7 days to provide full functionality and services for all of their users. Now, with the DJC-2, it's actually made up of a series of tents, and they have generators for power, they bring portable air conditioning units to keep the servers cold, they bring in tables and chairs and phones and networks and laptops and all the things you need to support up to 200 people inside of this large tent structure. For example, back in 2010, there was a major earthquake that hit the island nation of Haiti. Back then, the US military deployed one of these DJC-2s there to act as a mobile command center and run all the recovery operations. Now, the great thing about this type of mobile recovery site is that they are fully contained. They come with everything you need, including power, connectivity, and the technicians needed to run the entire thing. So, you may be wondering, which of these types of sites should I use in my organization? A hot site, a warm site, a cold site, or a mobile site? Well, this is why senior managers need to be involved in your business continuity plan creation process, because sometimes you're going to choose one of these, or you might choose multiple of these, breaking them out for different business functions, different scenarios, or different timelines, or different groups of users. Now, for example, in my company, we actually use a full hot site for our servers to ensure they're always up and operational at all times. But we don't use a full hot site for our employees. Instead, we have a small office and we allow and encourage telework in our organization. So for the most part, most of my team members are working from their own home offices and not from our office building. Since we've designed all of our technology to be able to support a fully remote workforce like this, it means that if one of their home offices loses power or internet, we can simply put them into a local hotel room. And as long as they have internet and power in that hotel, they'll be able to reconnect and get back to work right away. Now, in addition to all of that, we also plan for potential power outages and internet outages at our offices because we have primary power being delivered by solar panels. Then we have backup power for the times the sun isn't out. Now, if we run out of battery power, we actually can go into our backup generators. And we also have a connection back to the local power grid, and we can also pull power from there too if we need to. So for internet connectivity, we do the same kind of thing as well by having redundancies. In fact, we have 3 different connections to our offices. The first one is a microwave link that gives us high-speed uploads and downloads. If that fails, we have a redundant connection from a local cable company that provides high-speed downloads but slower uploads. Now, if both of those options fail, we have a third connection, and this is actually a cellular modem backup that provides about 20 megabits per second of service for uploads and downloads. By layering our internet connectivity as part of our business continuity planning, we know that our expected response and downtime would be for a primary internet connection failure, for example, and then we know we can shift to a secondary one in just a few seconds or a third one in a few seconds after that if needed. Now, up to this point, we've talked about 4 main types of sites. We've talked about hot sites, warm sites, cold sites, and mobile sites. But recently, we also have to introduce a 5th type of site, which is known as a virtual site. Now, a virtual site represents a modern and highly flexible approach to implementing redundant site strategies by offering various alternatives for hot sites, warm sites, and cold sites within a cloud-based environment. In a cloud-based redundant site setup, organizations can leverage the scalability and availability of cloud computing platforms to ensure their continuity of operations. A virtual hot site in this context would involve a fully replicated and instantly accessible environment in the cloud that's ready to take over in the event of a failure at your primary site. A virtual warm site may entail having partially replicated resources and data that could be quickly scaled up to full functionality if needed. And a virtual cold site could involve storing critical data and configurations in the cloud, but activating resources only in response to a disaster in order to minimize your ongoing operational costs. The use of these virtual sites in the cloud does offer us with the advantage of rapid scalability, cost effectiveness, and easy maintenance, and all of this makes them an attractive options for organizations that are aiming to enhance their disaster recovery capabilities. Now, the final thing we need to discuss as a redundant site consideration is the use of platform diversity. Platform diversity is a critical aspect of designing and implementing effective virtual redundant sites. By diversifying the type of operating systems, networking equipment, and cloud platform providers that are going to be used for redundancy, your organization can mitigate the risk of a single point of failure in their disaster recovery strategy. For example, if you wanted to have cloud provider platform diversity, this could involve spreading our resources across multiple cloud service providers or across different regions within the same provider to ensure that a failure or outage in one platform or area of the world doesn't compromise the entire redundant site. This approach does enhance the resilience and reduces the likelihood of downtime due to a cloud-specific issue. Moreover, platform diversity also allows your organization to leverage its unique features, pricing structures, and geographic reach of your different cloud providers in order to optimize your disaster recovery strategy to meet your specific business needs. Using cloud platform diversity is a strategic move that helps to ensure greater reliability and adaptability in the face of unexpected disruptions while making the implementation of virtual redundant sites even more robust and resilient. Now, another type of platform diversity is going to involve using different operating systems or types of network infrastructure at your redundant sites than you would at your primary site. For example, if your primary site uses a Cisco-based network, your redundant site might choose to use a different router and switch provider. But why, you might ask? Doesn't that just complicate things? Well, if you're using the same equipment in both sites, you're going to have an easier time supporting it and running the network because they are identical in nature, which is great because all your technicians already have that skill set. But if a major vulnerability existed that attacked all Cisco-based networks, it could also attack your hot site's network too, and now you don't have your redundant site available. But if you're using a different platform on your hot site, it's going to remain immune to this type of vulnerability and attack. Again, this is something that you and your senior decision makers are going to weigh the risks and the rewards to determine what makes the most sense for your organization. Should you have platform diversity and the more complex configurations and support it requires? Or should you just use the same operating systems and equipment across all of your redundant sites because it makes it easier to support and gives you lower maintenance costs? Either of these can be the right answer depending on your specific situation. So remember, when it comes to determining which type of redundant site you should use, you should not only just consider your tech stack, but you also need to think about where you're going to put your people and where they're going to be able to work, as well as how you're going to support them for the long term as you attempt to continue your operations and serve your customers. Continuity of operations refers to the ability of an organization to maintain essential functions and services in the event of a disruption. A hot site is going to be one that includes a fully equipped backup facility, where a warm site will have partially equipped backups, and a cold site will be locations without equipment that is readily available. And finally, remember that it's important that you also consider to use geographic dispersion to help spread out your resources across different locations so you can create higher levels of redundancy too.